Okay, so we were talking about what is comprehended in biological anthropology. So we have talked about primatology, we have talked about variation among human beings, some of the biological and physical variations that we see as being recent adaptations to the spread of human beings around the world. We then went into the story of human evolution from our bipedal hominins through to Homo sapiens. We're not going to forget about biology and the physical aspects of human beings, and we'll revisit that at various points as we go along. But we're shifting into things that are more around ideas of cultural anthropology, some linguistic anthropology, archaeology. Now, culture has always been there, and it's key for shaping how we evolved as Homo sapiens. We talked about different kinds of tools that people have been using for over 2 million years and how that results in cumulative culture, which we build up over time. And it is that cumulative culture that enabled these puny, not very physically well adapted to extreme climates, Homo sapiens to go all over the place and live in places that Homo sapiens would have never imagined living when they were first evolving in the savanna and other environments of Africa. How did they do that? They did that because they were adaptable, flexible, because they were able to move and migrate from place to place, because they maintained interconnections among all of these groups and began to trade or continued to trade along various trade routes and pathways. The importance of learned behavior, what we call culture, is what enables Homo sapiens to succeed and spread out. Whether it will keep us being able to succeed, that's still an open question, but had a decent run so far. In this section, we will be talking more about how these Homo sapiens, there was always variability, physical variability, and social variability among Homo sapiens. But as they spread out into different places, they eventually developed what we might consider different societies, different cultural groups, different ways of speaking, languages intensified perhaps their differences the further over distant, more distant they got from each other. And we will especially be looking at this in terms of their material culture, because that is the evidence that we have. Spoken language does not preserve in the archaeological record. So we will be in this section doing a lot of stuff more with what we would call material culture or archaeology. So today, one of the ways in which humans differentiate themselves and say that they belong to different societies is through language. And language developed early. We don't know exactly how early. We know that different primates do use vocalizations and gestures in order to communicate. They do that in the wild without humans around. We have also taught certain apes how to use signed languages. So there are some very famous cases of this. Koko, the signing gorilla, Washoe, the signing chimpanzee, Kanzi, the signing bonobo. All of these apes were often raised with human beings with the intent of teaching them sign language. Some of them got pretty good. We don't really do this anymore because it's not the most ethical thing to do. So obviously the apes or other primates have capabilities in terms of being able to interpret and produce their own signs. But human language builds on this and does something that we haven't seen the primates be able to do, which is to produce new sentences or new ideas and to talk about things that may not even exist. If I told you to look up at the purple dinosaurs floating all around the room, you might think that I'd probably had a little too much something in the morning. But you could imagine such a thing. There are no purple dinosaurs, but you can still put it into your head. And this is something that is crazy about human language, is we can talk about things that haven't happened yet, have happened, but we lie about them, things that we want to have happen, things that will never happen, but we can make sense of it or understand it in a certain way. And that's because human language is highly symbolic. That is to say, we use these symbols, we'll talk more about these, that we agree upon what they mean, but if you don't know what they mean, you have no idea what we're talking about, either in terms of the language spoken or the language written. If you don't share that language, it makes no sense, and there's no connection between that language that you're speaking and the stuff that you're talking about. Human languages feature complex grammars, all that stuff you had to learn in school, nouns and verbs and adverbs and present tenses, past tenses, and people do this in all kinds of different ways. Not all languages share the same grammar complexities. But let's just say people do this and it's complicated. But the crazy thing about it is, most of that we just absorb by doing and speaking in a social context. Most of the people who speak languages for human history never went to school, and yet they are able to do complex story traditions and oral traditions. This comes to us as we onboard culture and learn behavior. This is something that we take up before we even get to class. Probably in class, we destroy the poets, make them sad. Human beings everywhere are very attentive, or we spend a lot of time with our offspring. We are carrying our infants around in various ways, and they're very dependent upon us as our brains are growing and developing. So the neurology is you are taking on language and listening to people talk and learning the ways of your own society, the languages that are spoken there as your brain is growing and developing. It becomes very incorporated into your biology, and you'll feel more natural in the languages that you were taught. And here we have pictures of a couple different ways in which this happens. So our textbook tells us that in US societies, we tend to look at our infants in the eyes and talk directly to them, whereas in other societies, you'll orient the children outwards in order to hear from other people. I don't know if I buy it in this case. That guy looks like he's just, do you really want to look at an infant like that in the eye? They're too freaky. They'll like stare back at you. I would never do that. I'd always carry the kid out in front of me so they look out like me into the world, just like that, much better. So there is variation within any society. This is not to say that this is a hard and fast rule, but there are different ways in which we encourage people, our infants and our kids, to learn the language in the style that is appropriate to them and learn the ways in which they should address other people. And that becomes important for how we are developing and as a social practice. Now, the linguists get into all kinds of words in order to describe what happens in language. And one of the reasons linguistics is so complicated, and linguistic anthropology is probably one of our most difficult subfields, is because you need a meta language to talk about language. That is to say, you need a words, a whole language to talk about the language that you're trying to investigate. The linguists use these terms, which may seem a little bit funny, forget which one is which. They distinguish between the signified and the signifier. The signified is whatever you are trying to talk about. Could be that table, could be the desk, could be an idea in your head, the purple dinosaurs. That is the signified, the idea, the object, the thing in the world that I'm trying to talk about. The signifier is what I use to talk about that thing in the world. The linguists say that there are three types of signifiers. The first type of signifier is an icon. An icon, for the linguists, is something that is supposed to look like what it represents. My best example. Sorry. When you go and you're trying to figure out what is going on behind that door, you get an icon and you know you can go in there. It's supposed to look like what's there, hopefully. That's one form of signifiers. We use them. Not everybody agrees on what they are, as we'll figure out, but they're supposed to look like what they are. Another type of signifier is called an index. And an index is so called because it is a way of pointing at something else. Your textbook uses the example of smoke to indicate fire. So you might see the smoke or point to the smoke and you believe that where there is smoke, there is fire. It's indexing the fire. Maybe this is a decent example. You have an arrow, which indicates where this garage sale is supposed to be. The arrow is an index. It's not an icon because it doesn't look like the garage sale. It points to something else, or it points to the context in which you have to be. Those words, though, are symbols. That is to say, we have to read them. They have encoded some kind of message in them. So there's been a thought, or there's been an action that I've put out a bunch of stuff, and now I am encoding a message about it, and you have to decode the message, and you have to understand what is going on. There are a lot of assumptions that go into this decoding. First of all, you have to know all those letters. You have to know what a garage is. You have to know that somebody's going to have things to buy and sell. There's also something about those other symbols today, which are also indexical, or they index something. What is the problem with putting up a sign that has an arrow on it and it says today? I'm walking down the street. Yeah. What if they put it up? What day is it? Right? Today is an indexical statement. It does not tell you when exactly it is. So unless I can see this garage sale going on, I might wonder, did this person put this sign up and then forget to take it down? So today is also an indexical symbol here of what's going on, and you have to decode it, and you might wonder, is it worth walking in that direction? Because I don't know if it's today or not. Now, the symbols that we use, the linguists use a term called arbitrary to indicate that there is no necessary connection between the word, the sounds, the signs, if you're using signed language, and the stuff itself. So in an icon, for example, the icon is supposed to look like what it represents. The index is supposed to point to it, but the symbol has no necessary connection. There's no necessary reason why I call that a table, and in another language, you might call it a mesa. There's nothing table-like or mesa-like about that makes me use a certain word. The symbols are fairly arbitrary. There are certain words that we use that are onomatopoetic. Wow, talk about an arbitrary symbol right there. They're supposed to sound like what it is that you're saying, but those are not too many in our language. You have to decode these symbols. One of the issues with symbols is when you decode them, it's often difficult to figure out or what the meaning is without some form of context. You often need some kind of emotion in there in order to figure out what the person is trying to tell you. One sentence 5 words in 1 syllable, so I'm going to say it in 2 different ways. So if I just say, the house is on fire, in that tone of voice, you've probably understood what I said. What should you do if I say, the house is on fire?
Well, to make sure it is.
Well, you probably don't have to do anything. There you are. You haven't done anything. Look at you. You're not doing anything because it might be a house way off in the distance. You might have just read about it on the news. So the words are the house is on fire. Now, what should you do if I say the same 5 words? It's too early in the morning. I'm going to sum up all my energy. Here I go. That cup of coffee is coming in. The house is on fire. Now what should you do? Yeah, run. I'm surprised you haven't all ditched out of here to either get out of this burning house or check your own house. So you need some emotional context to do this. This may have happened to you sometimes when people text you. Ever totally got a text message wrong because you didn't know what the emotion was supposed to be, or they put a period at the end of it. And then it was like, is this relationship over because he used a period? Fortunately, something came along to help us out. The emojis. Then we know. Then you have a smiley face. You're like, yay, that must be happy. But even emojis don't always completely rescue us. I didn't really get this in the text, but some of you might be able to decode this. This is a petroglyph carved into the rock. Yes, Puerto Pueblo, Arizona. What kind of a signifier is this supposed to be? It's supposed to be an icon. It's supposed to look like what it is. But we might wonder what it is. A lot of tourists who go to this place would tell us that this is a stork carrying a baby, just like storks carry babies. That's how you were all born. The stork came and brought a baby. Some of the indigenous people in this area say, no, this is a clan story, and that is not a baby, that is a frog. And this is a different type of bird, which is the signature of the painting would indicate which clans are being represented. The Crane clan, and the father was from the Frog clan. But some indigenous Hopi people suggest the image represents the story of a giant bird that eats bad children. That one is obviously true. If you're a parent, you need a giant bird to eat bad children, or at least to tell them that a giant bird is going to come and else obey. So interpreting which version of this, again, there's not necessarily a correctness to this, but even something that is supposed to be an icon can be reinterpreted or interpreted according to an oral tradition, and in this case, according to origin myths. What brings up a very important point for us is that a lot of what we agree upon is what they call situated knowledge. It's knowledge, but it's in a particular place, and it is done with other people in a certain time and place. It may not make sense outside of that time and place, in the same way that when the garage sale says today, you need a little bit of situated knowledge to understand your neighborhood and what today might mean in that context. We talked about signifiers that are indexes. They point to something else. And what this brings up is a concept or an idea called indexicality, which means language that relies on the context in which it was spoken in order to make sense. So indexicality is language that relies on having some context in order to understand it. Most of the stuff we say on a day-to-day basis is very indexical. Hey, meet me at our favorite place tonight. Very indexical unless you know what your favorite place is. Or should we meet at our usual spot? And then somebody outside of that context is going to have no idea what it is you're saying if you don't know that already. Where is it that you hear the most non-indexical language? So a news report is supposed to be propositional. It's not supposed to be indexical because it is supposed to be telling you something about what happened, who, where, when, what, why. It's all supposed to be contained in that. That's what you're supposed to do. That's the purpose of journalism, is to make propositional statements. You hear them from me. You hear them in school. That's where you get a lot of propositional. The capital of France is in Paris, and that's why it's so boring. Because it's non-indexical. It's got nothing to do with your life. And you're like, why do I have to know what it means to be inaugurated? And what is this dude making me rank these things for? The capital of France? Who cares? It's these statements and professors are boring because we deal in non-indexical language, and that's why we don't like to listen to the news either, because the news is bad and because it's trying to give us these definite who, what, when kinds of statements.